Welcome back. You're watching Squawk Box, live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square.
Good morning. Welcome back to Squawk Box. Take a look at U.S. equity futures at this hour. We are in the green this morning. Some folks focus on the stock market, others on Bitcoin. We will get to that, I promise. But Dow looks like it would open up right now about 55 points higher. NASDAQ looking to open about 8 points higher, and the S&P 500 looking to open about 4.5 points higher. Joseph.
It's a big week for tax reform. The House and Senate will start reconciliation of both bills, paving the way for their self-imposed December 22nd deadline. Today's the 11th, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable. We're going to see in real time whether this works or not. Joining us now, Senator Dr. Bill Cassidy. He sits on the Finance Committee. And I'm going to start because I was listening to Meg Terrell's interview with the CEO of Celgene, and another CEO that in a totally disparate business than some of the others that we've spoken to that have talked about how important this would be to their business. And again, Celgene, it's not one where I thought it would make a huge difference to his business. And he said it would. It's transformative. It's been 30 years. We really hope this gets done. And I don't think it's about CEO compensation with every one of these guys. I don't think that they're all that. I don't think that's what's dictating whether they think it's a good. I think they genuinely think that this is going to help corporate America. Why is it so hard to sell to everybody else and to the public, Senator?
No one likes change, even when it's from worse to better. Particularly when you have a lot of folks who hate Trump so much that if Trump said, let's close the window on a snowy day, they would say, oh my gosh, we don't want to do it. On the other hand, when people open up their paychecks and they see beginning next year there's more in their paycheck, not for everybody, but for most people, and for corporate America that is now not competing against some companies which have a 12% tax rate when they have a 35%, arbitraging the difference to come back and compete. I think it'll be a game changer.
There's got to be something to what you just said from the Democrats' point of view as well, because they haven't always been anti-corporate tax reform. They in the past, it seems like it was something that you could have worked on with them. Also, and I understand the party in power likes deficits. The party that's out of power suddenly hates deficits, and I understand how that all gets demagogued. But a lot of what we're seeing on the resistance is just that. It's resistance. People are getting resistance trees this year.
Totally.
With Hillary on the top as an angel. Did you see that Hillary angel that you can?
You showed it to me.
I showed. Well, I mean, they were sold out, and because I bought.
About all of them.
Giving them those as gifts, obviously. But
there is a resist movement, but if you look back, there's a strong history of Democrats, rightfully so, saying that we have to have corporate tax reform. And every time you have a corporation invert, move to Ireland, and then come back and compete with a lower tax rate, it builds the case for corporate tax reform. We've done it. Those companies are now not incentivized to move overseas. They're incentivized to stay here.
Was there a single House Democrat that voted for it?
No, but again, it is just a resist movement right now.
There's almost 500 total.
Look, I think there's a couple of questions, right? One is
you don't hate it that much, do you? The corporate side of things?
The corporate side of things I don't hate, except for the cost of it, which is to say
the individual.
I think on the individual. Look, I've always said you could go down to zero if you want to.
Now, factor out your own New York residency and SALT, but middle class, it's not a huge hike on the middle class. The middle class will do better with this, won't it, or you don't think so? The center needs
I think that the middle class broadly will do better on the margins. I think it will help on the margins increase wage growth. I think on the margins increase. But on the margins, on a relative basis, I think everybody who's sitting at this table will probably be the greater beneficiary, and we've already seen it in terms of the stock. If you own assets, you'll be the winner by a long shot because you're going to see more buybacks.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing because of 401ks.
More dividends, and all of that. You just have to decide.
I mean, prosperity, even if it is.
You just have to decide how you want to do it. And I do think, and you may say this is selfish, I do think on the SALT issue, for many blue states, it becomes very complicated very, very quickly, and I think that's sort of
it does. I wouldn't be surprised if there's movement on the SALT issue. Obviously, Senator Collins is concerned about that. It has to get back through the Senate. Her vote's critical. There's Republicans from states like New York, New Jersey, California, who have an investment in it. McConnell's indicated a willingness to move on it. So I think there'll be some movement on that. But going back to your point, yes, there's going to be things on the margin. But by definition, if you're going to have wage growth, it's going to be on the margin. It's not going to be 40%. It's going to be 3%, 4%. But that's a lot better than we've had for the last 8 years. And if you add to that the corporate growth that then translates into better jobs because there's more competition for workers. In Louisiana, I just toured a place, a $5 billion project. There's $60 billion in announced projects in Southwest Louisiana. Welders are having their wages jacked up because people are competing for a good welder to come to their site. Now, that's the kind of America we actually need. You guys are going to do very well, I imagine. But those welders are the ones who've been hurting.
Do you hear more from multinationals or companies more focused domestically? Because they're both going to win. But on the margin, is there one that you hear more for? Because I think domestic companies, if they have certainty, will actually start spending that money.
I agree with that. I hear from both. The corporates love it because they were thinking of inverting. The small businesses who are job growth engines, they've loved Trump since he got elected. For them, there has been certainty. Under the previous president, they just always felt like there was a gun to the head and they didn't know when it would go off. A modern day sort of Democles. And they just feel so comfortable now, and they're making that investment. So we hear from both.
When you say movement on the SALT issue, what do you mean? What have you been hearing? Is it the $10,000 cap for property as well as income that we've been sort of hearing about, or what do you mean?
McConnell mentioned that, and he said he was open to that, and I can imagine that, because there's some states relatively low in one and high in the other, vice versa. New York's high in both. But you really go a long way there to offsetting that cost. Now you have to pay for it, but the president has said he's open to a higher corporate tax rate. I don't know if that's the answer, but it could be.
So the Journal has a piece that the overall approval of President Trump is at lows, historic lows, but that on the economy he's doing much better. But it's still 42% approval, 37% non-approval. I'm wondering if we were to have a continuation of this 3% GDP growth, and if we were to see the stock market maintain these gains and do better, I still think there's a ceiling based on tweets or other issues that has nothing to do with the economy. And then I guess the other question, now that I've made that point, Roy Moore, what's going to happen? What happens to the Republican Party? He's ahead again, I think, theoretically. And they're saying that he may even be ahead more because people won't admit they're voting for him. Do you expect him to win, and will he be seated? And what's the ethics?
Well, the polls say that he has to be seated. The Constitution says he has to. As the polls say he's going to win, the Constitution says he has to be seated.
Okay.
But if I'm President Trump running in 4 years, I would just say, are you better off now than you were when I was elected?
Oh, I've heard that question before. That's a good one.
And it's a great question.
Yeah.
And I saw one of those articles, an African-American woman who had been a strong Democrat, but she said, I have to admit, I'm doing a lot better since President Trump took office. Now, that's a powerful statement. And there's a lot of folks out there who, under the previous 8 years, felt like their job was always on the chopping block. And now, on the margin, but definitely, they're making more money.
Were you there for Senator Franken's speech?
No, I've watched it, but I was not in the chamber.
Okay. So if Roy Moore gets elected and he's going to be seated, is Al Franken going to follow? I don't understand why he didn't resign that day. He's like, it's like things could change, right? Is he going to resign?
You know, I can't get inside Al Franken's mind, but clearly he was drummed out. He did not have to quit. He was probably told by Chuck Schumer, you're going to lose your committee assignments.
It gives him a platform to attack Trump on and tell him to resign. I saw it. Cory Booker said it on Friday, I think. He said, look, Senator Franken's done the right thing when it's Trump resign. He immediately, and it almost looked like it was coordinated.
It might be. I can't get inside their mind. I do think he was drummed out. There was no due process. Whatever you think about it, you got to have due process in our country. You can't have kangaroo courts. You have to allow people to be presented with evidence and to refute it.
All right, thanks for going all these places with us, Senator. I didn't ask you about your Bitcoin so I did respect your privacy.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you for the conversation.